Hey, Dan.
Morning, Rabbi. I was very happy to hear about your upcoming trip. It's always nice to be able to go for simchas and spend time with your mishpacha.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hey, Lois.
Hey, Rabbi. Good morning.
Good morning. I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the Shema, mainly because I heard this awesome thing from Rabbi Foreman, and it works well into something about the Shema. Remember, last time we were talking about what is the Shema. So it ends up that that when the Rambam talks about the Shema, he's referring to all three paragraphs, what we today call the three paragraphs of the Shema. You can tell from the Gemara, hey Estelle, you can tell from the Gemara's discussion that they also oftentimes mean all three paragraphs when they say the Shema. What we call the V'ahavta, the Shema and the V'ahavta is number one, and then V'ha'im Shemoah, number two, and the Vayomer that has tzitzis in it as number three. So you can tell that everybody does recognize that all three of those make up the Shema. But what is the mitzvah? What do you have to say minimally? There's opinions that minimally you just have to say the first line. There's opinions that you just have to say the first paragraph. There's opinions that it's just the first two paragraphs. And there's opinions that it's all three. It looked like from the Rambam in the codes that his opinion is that the biblical mitzvah is fulfilled by all three, although there is even discussion about that. And then he suggests, so there's a mitzvah to say the Shema. That's a mitzvah by itself. There's also other mitzvot that are fulfilled by saying the Shema. For instance, what he calls unifying God's name. Because when you say, Lord our God, the Lord is one, you are unifying God's name. You are declaring his unity. There's the mitzvah to love God, which is declared in that the paragraph. There's the mitzvah to study Torah. He's going to actually talk about the mitzvah of studying and teaching Torah next, but the Talmud suggests that you have fulfilled your minimum requirement to study Torah just by reading the Shema. There's the mitzvah of remembering the going out of Egypt, which is in the third paragraph of the Shema. But I've been studying with a guy named Travis Gaines, and we've been going through a series of lectures by Rabbi Foreman. It's on the two names of God. So that he has a series of like 12 lectures or something on the two names of God. What he does is he goes through chapter 1 and the first few verses of chapter 2, which are the 7 days of creation. And then the next section, what has come to be known as the first telling of creation and the second telling of creation, the story of Adam 1 and Adam 2 in the language of Rabbi Soloveitchik, and then talking about the differences between them and what they tell us. But one of the interesting things that he suggested was that God's name Elohim, when we speak about God as Elohim, we mean God as judge or king. Now, how do we get to that? Why would they say that? Why do we mean that? Because if you look at God as he is represented in that first story of creation in chapter 1 and then the beginnings of chapter 2, like the first 4 verses of chapter 2, if you look at it, first of all, it just uses the name Elohim. That's the name. We're introduced to God as Elohim. So over there, you see him judging. how do you see him judging? Because he plans what he's going to do, then he carries it out, and then he makes a judgment about it. He says it is good, or it is very good. So it's he had a name for it. He called it. It was a way, God's way in the world, or with the world in the beginning. I'll remember what it is, but it's God sort of plans what he's going to do that day. He says, "Let's do this." Then he does it, and then he judges it. It was good. So we see God in this kind of mode. He's in a very productive mode, and is concerned about how it turned out. That's Elohim. That's how we see Elohim. When we see the four-letter name, which is introduced in the next story together with Elohim, but it's a four-letter name, it's introduced. He suggests that we're seeing God in a different mode. This is from a different angle. We see God as in his mode of being. God is, in the first one, is more about doing, and God in the next one is more about being. It's not just God, the whole world and man, everybody. The emphasis in the next part is about being, and not just being, but being with. Relationships. Relationships are very important in the second one. Why do you have children in the first story? You have children because you're going to be fruitful, and you're going to multiply, and you're going to fill the earth. It's very pragmatic. That's why you have children in the first story. Why do you have children in the second story? It's an end product of a relationship. It doesn't even, it's not so much having a relationship to have children, which it might sound like more in the first one, but children are a byproduct of a relationship. A man is going to cleave to his wife as one flesh. That is the byproduct of that is going to be children. And he suggests that this name, this four-letter name, is really explained by God to Moshe at the burning bush. What is God? Moshe says, "Who should I tell them is sending me?" And that's when God tells him his name. I will be. But it's not. But Rashi says over there, it's not just I will be, but I will be with you. Just like I'm with you now, I will be with you then. So this is an important detail he is suggesting, that this name, the four-letter name, which is Moshe Shapiro, blessed memory, suggests that it's from God's perspective. We use the four-letter name, and we start it with a yud because it's about him. He will be, right? He will be. Or he is, he was, he will be. It's about him. But when God's talking from his perspective, he starts with an aleph. I will be. But it's the same name. It's talking about the same thing. But what Rabbi Foreman's suggesting is it's not just about being, but it's about being with. Just like I'm with you here, I'm going to be with you there. And so that this is how all the creativity emerges from the relationships, and also a kind of drive towards relationships. There's not just a relationship, but there's going to be a drive towards relationship. He suggests, though, that when you have both these names together, you have, and again, he takes time to develop this, and this is many hours of stuff. But at one point, he suggests that when you have both of these together, God as judge and God as being with, so you have what he wants to call love and respect, closeness and distance. So, for instance, he says the tree of knowledge of good and evil, is called Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, good and bad. the tree of good and bad. And he asked, like, if you would ask, which name of God should be associated with that tree? So, people in the class said the name Elohim, because it suggests judgment. There's certain things that are good, there's certain things that are bad. So he said, he accepts that. Then he says, which name of God should be associated with the tree of life? And obviously, people are going to jump to saying it's the 4-letter name. But he said it's a tree of relationship. Eventually, it's a tree of life, but it's not just a tree of life. How do you get that life? Eventually, in Mishlei, it's going to say, Eitz Chaim hi lamachaziki ba. It's a tree of life to those who cleave to it. It's the description of love, being with. In love, the happiness is when you're with the person that you love, and sadness is when you're separated from the person of love that you're with. So love is very much about relationship with, being with. And he suggests that the tree of life is the tree of life and the tree of good and evil reflect these two different qualities of our relationship with God. There's one where it's more what he's going to suggest is respect, boundaries, giving space and respect. And the other one is love, which is about coming close. In a relationship, and he goes on to talk about it all at quite some length, but in relationship, you need both. You need a respect for boundaries, and there has to be an opportunity for some distance. And then you also have to have closeness and an opportunity for intimacy. So with God, we recognize both. So he didn't talk about the Shema in this way, but I'm suggesting in the Shema that you have these two mitzvahs. One, and these, when you're actually saying the Shema, it's suggested that you think about this. I wonder if it's even in the art scroll. I'm just going to look for a second at the art scroll to see if it, because in my siddur it does have both these ideas. But let's just see here how they say it in the art scroll. So here it says, recite the first verse aloud with the right hand covering the eyes, and concentrate intensely upon accepting God's absolute sovereignty, what we call Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shamayim, accepting the yoke of heaven, the yoke of heaven. And then the next one is, while reciting the first paragraph, concentrate on accepting the commandment to love God. So you have like the yoke of heaven and love God. So you have both these concepts. You have like the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then you have the tree of life. You have the one that you're supposed to cleave. You have, and these are reflective also in our relationship with God. That there's a time when you embrace God, and there's a time when you're supposed to stand in awe, like it, with a little bit of separation. And so when you think of the yoke of heaven, because the yoke is like, a yoke is a burden. A yoke isn't, that's how they call it in Hebrew. They're talking about accepting a sovereignty. That was when last time I was talking about it as a pledge of allegiance. But when you do that, that's more of a reverence. That's something where you're standing apart and you recognize that he is your commander. He is, which is very much reflected in the name Elohim. But then the 4-letter name could be said. So even to reflect the loving kindness that God, as we saw, he's with us, he's being with us in relationship with God. You could say they actually both exist together in that line. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. When I recognize that there are, these names represent even slightly different relationships with God, but ultimately it's all one. It's the same being, even though there are different experiences in our relation with the same being. And this is, in fact, a model for how all relationships, all healthy relationships, there should be an element of love and an element of awe. A person should have awe for the other at the same time that they have love for the other. So I just thought it was interesting because you have these two, like you'll say in the beginning, I have a mitzvah to say the Shema. And then I'm thinking there's a mitzvah to accept God's yoke of heaven. And then there's a mitzvah, or whatever, it's appropriate to accept the yoke of heaven. The Rambam doesn't identify that as a separate mitzvah. He doesn't call it a separate mitzvah, but it's the intent you're supposed to have over there, that I'm accepting the yoke of heaven, and then I'm accepting the mitzvah to love God. And they seem to represent those two aspects of the names that are reflected in the Shema. So that was just a thought inspired by Rabbi Foreman. Okay. Mitzvah number 11. That is, that he commanded us to study Torah and to teach it. And that is a saying, and you shall teach them to your sons. So this is from the Shema itself, from that first paragraph of the Shema, V'shinantam levanecha. And it is written in the Sifrei. Again, this is the one of the great books of Midrash on the book of Devarim, the Sifrei. It says, to your sons, these are the students, for students are called sons, as it is stated, and the sons of the prophets came forth, B'nai Hanavim. This would include both men and women. And there it says, and you shall teach Shinantam, which is related to the word shane, tooth, them. They shall be sharp in your mouth, so that if one questions you about something, you will not stammer to him, but tell him forthwith. In other words, prepare. The Rambam is suggesting, and this is based on he's getting this from the Midrash. Your goal is to learn the information well enough so that when somebody asks you a question, you don't stammer with the answer. That's called knowing it. What's called knowing something? That if somebody would ask you the question, you won't stammer with it. So that means that you've committed it to memory, but not just committed it to memory, but you've also assimilated the ideas to the point where you're making all the necessary connections in order to be able to answer questions. Now, and this command was repeated several times. You shall teach them and to do them. So there, in order that they shall learn. So there, it also adds the element that when you teach it, you should teach it in a way that they're going to know how to practice it. So if it's a mitzvah, for instance, you're not just going to teach the mitzvah, but your goal is that you're going to teach it to them so that they can do it. And the command and encouragement of this commandment has already been scattered through many places in the Talmud. Women are not obligated in it. Now, what he means by that is the daily study of it. From his saying, and shall teach them to your sons, his saying, your sons and not your daughters, as explained in the Gemara, see Parshas Veschanan. So the actual, this is going to apply to the teaching and the study. The daily study, women are not going to be obliged in, and also they are not going to be obliged in the mitzvah to teach their children. This is ironic because they are going to be the ones who teach the children, at least in the beginning, a lot of stuff. So it's sort of interesting that they will probably be the ones to teach them, even though at least the stuff that they're getting early on, they're going to be the ones to teach them. But they are not obliged to teach them. And they're also not obliged for daily Torah study. If you
Rabbi,
look at
what is that phrase when it says the Torah of your mother and the learning of, what, I forget.
Shema B'ni Yes, that's very. It's in the beginning of Mishlei, Proverbs. Shma bani musar avicha. Listen, my son, or hear, my son, to the tradition of your father. Va'al titosh torat imecha, and don't turn away from the Torah of your mother.
Huh.
So this is, again, and that's an excellent point that you're making. This by saying that they're not obliged doesn't mean that there won't be the Torah of your mother. In fact, it's your first Torah. It's the first Torah. Your Torah for the first several years is coming to you through your mother. So it's sort of interesting. They're not going to be obliged to do it. I just want to go back and just look again. It says that he's commanded to study Torah and to teach it. He's counting this as one mitzvah. You see that? He's not counting it as two separate mitzvahs. He's studying, it's Hushitzivanu lilmod Torah u lalamda v'zeh nikra Talmud Torah. There's one mitzvah called Talmud Torah. That one mitzvah is built on two parts, studying and teaching. It's just sort of interesting. He's not separating them. You'd think that they are two separate things. A person could study his whole life and never teach. So, but he calls the mitzvah Talmud Torah, and it has two components. One is the study of it, and one is the teaching of it. And here they don't have anybody who seems to disagree with this. Now let's go back and look at. We're going to go look at we did see this one time, but we're just going to go back and look at this again. It says here, chapter 1, mitzvah 1 of never mind. Okay. So here goes. Women, slaves, and minors are free from the obligation of Torah study. Nevertheless, a father is obligated to teach his son Torah while he is a minor, as it states, and you shall teach them to your sons to speak about them. A woman is not obligated to teach her son, for only those who are obligated to learn are obligated to teach. Just as a person is obligated to teach his son, so too he's obligated to teach his grandson, as it commands, and you shall teach them to your sons and your grandsons. Furthermore, this charge is not confined to one's children and grandchildren alone. Rather, it is a mitzvah for each and every wise man to teach all students, even though they are not his children. As it says, you shall teach them to your sons. The oral tradition explains, your sons, these are your students, as he had quoted from, this is the Sifri, he's just not saying it's a Sifri here, but he said, mitzvahs, these are your students, for students are also called sons. And the sons of the prophets went forth. If so, why did the commandment explicitly mention one son and grandson? To grant precedence to one son over one's grandson and one's grandson over the son of a colleague. And then one is obligated to hire a teacher for one's son, while one is not required to undertake any expense to teach a colleague's son. A person who's not instructed by his father is obligated to arrange for his own instruction when he can understand, as it says, and you shall study them and take heed to perform them. Similarly, in every place one finds that study takes precedence over deed, for study brings about deed. However, deed does not bring about study. Okay, so again, this is such an elemental mitzvah, because how can you live the life of a Jewish person and not be learned? So it seems to be very basic to the fulfillment of the mission, which is characterized as going in the way of God in several places, doing tzedakah umishpat, doing what is righteous and just. Again, you have to know what is righteous and just in order to be able to do it. So learning about it and educating others about it is absolutely essential. the only, as far as not as saying that women are not obliged to teach their children, when you know full well that they're going to be the ones who are doing it, I guess the part that it spares them the responsibility for is after, when they're older. When they're older. So let's say they're going to be homeschooled. In much of Jewish history, there were schools, but that wasn't the assumption initially. The assumption was that people would be homeschooled. That's what it seems from the fact that it says you should teach your children and grandchildren. So it seems like the assumption was that people are going to be homeschooled. So who is going to be available to homeschool them? The husband's out in the fields, let's say working in the fields. So who's going to be available to homeschool them? So if they are literally homeschooled, it's going to be, you would imagine it's going to be the mother, at least up to a certain age. Maybe when they're old enough to go out to the field, they're going to have a schedule like their father, and then they'll study with their father. But so maybe it covers, I don't know what age. You're talking about going out in the field working. I'm assuming it's when their bodies are already starting to be strong. It's not going to be before they're like 10, 11, or 12 that they're going to be out there. So that time, let's say they're home. Obviously, they're going to have chores and stuff, but I'm assuming they'll be closer to home and more under the mother's influence, and eventually they're going to be at the father's. So it could be that you could say that when it's natural for them to be around the mother's just going to plain do it. She doesn't need to be commanded to do it. She's just going to be plain do it. Who needs to be commanded to do it? It's going to have to be somebody who may not, who may have other things, occupying their time, or just plain may not even think about it. And so who would that be? That would be the father. Because the once they're out working and stuff, you're going to have to actually carve out time to study. It's not necessarily going to be a natural part of life. But when they're at home and they're around the mother, there's many natural situations that are teaching moments for them. So it's possible that that's why it doesn't actually command the mother to do it, because it's just going to be a natural outgrowth of what she does, and she doesn't need a commandment to do it. Why does somebody need a commandment? Because otherwise they may not do it. I don't know. But otherwise, you're right. It's a very natural thing. It's so natural that in Mishlei it even refers to it as Torah's imacha.
But where originally is a woman supposed to learn what she should even teach? You see, there has to be something.
Right. Well, there's going to be tradition. There's going to be
tradition.
There's going to be, in other words, how do you do anything from the let's say she's cooking let's say she's helping her mother around the house. This is true with the boy too. The kids are around the house. So in the beginning, they're going to be around her while she's doing what she's doing. Everything she does is Torah.
But how does she learn how to do it Torah?
She learned it from her mother.
Yeah, but
she learned it from her mother, and she learned it from her mother.
Understand.
He's talking about tradition. You're talking about.
No, I'm talking about law. I'm talking about law. She's the one who's making challah. She knows the mother knows kashrus way better than the husband.
Sure, because there had to be an original teacher of some woman, right?
But I'm saying it doesn't have to be. Of course it is, but I'm saying it doesn't have to be commanded.
No,
of course they know.
No,
right? Of course they know. It's not forbidden. This is not saying it's forbidden to teach women. This is saying a woman is not commanded to teach her children. Why she's not commanded to study? She's not commanded to teach her children. Now, obviously, everything she does is Torah, and she's going to have to have learned it. I agree with you, but I'm saying, how do I know kashrus? I don't know kashrus because of my father. I know kashrus because of my mother. I don't know. It's not those kind of things. The halachos of how to go to bed and how to wake up in the morning and and Shabbos and the laws of Shabbos and things like that. Those are almost the father, the father will be consulted when it comes to some difficult point, but the basic process is all coming through the mother. It's all coming through the mother. It's true for the boys too, not just the girls. It's true for the boys too, up until a certain age. And it could be argued that even as a foundations for a halacha, that the foundation of most people's knowledge of halacha comes from their mothers, because by the time you go away to school and you're starting to get categories of thought, etc., those are built on building blocks that came from the stuff you learned at home. Now, again, for those of us who didn't learn it at home, for those of us who are learning it later on in life, so that didn't necessarily naturally happen. But for the people that it happened, you're getting nurtured in the foundation of everything you're going to learn afterwards. Like Rabbi Abraham J. Tursky, he said, it wasn't just, he said, he was talking about how he got used to being a doctor. When he's a doctor, he has to constantly be washing his hands, moving from one thing to another, sterilizing his hands, so he said, I learned that because of my mother. My mother used to make schmaltz before Pesach, and she did it like a few weeks before, and it was in a chametz house. So, the sterilization of the house, that was required preparation. He wasn't just learning Torah from her, he's learning, he was saying how much he learned about life from his mother. But even that, like, he's watching her do it. Where are you going to learn the halachas, the foundation for your knowledge of the halachas of chametz from, and getting rid of chametz for Pesach? You're learning it in the home from your mother. Now, again, is she speaking to you in legal categories? Is she talking to you about thorny gray areas and the reasoning behind it? Not necessarily, but the foundation that even gets you to go there is coming from her. Which is more important, the foundation or the later on discussion? The Kotzker Rebbe used to apparently stood whenever his first Rebbe walked into the room. He was the one who taught him Aleph Beis. So he said, so people said, "What? Why do you stand for him? You don't stand for your other. You don't see you standing for your other teachers." He says, "This one I know. He told me the emes. The other ones, I'm not sure if they told me the emes or not. But this one, he for sure taught me the emes." So, and for most people, even they, in most families, where did they learn the Aleph Beis from? They learned it from their mother. Their first person to teach them Aleph Beis wasn't their teacher. It was their mother. Now we have schools where the kid goes at 3 years old to school, or 2.5. So it does end up that a teacher is even teaching them those things. But that's not how it was. That wasn't how it was for most of human history. People weren't going away. They weren't being taught by teachers until they were older. That's the only thing I can suggest, because it's just so obviously the other way. It's so obvious that the mother is the teacher of the child. So why would you say she doesn't have to? So it must be that it means she doesn't have to go out of her way to do it in some kind of structured way. But she's going to be the teacher, the natural teacher of the children. There's just no way that in a regular situation she's not going to be the teacher of the children. And it will be the same thing about studying. Obviously, to know how to live a life of a Jew, she requires study. Obviously, she has to learn that stuff. But what she has to know might very much be tied to what she has to do, as opposed to learning for the sake of learning. That's what you're going to have to say. Because if it's learning to do, and it's something that she do, obviously she has to do that. Because how is she going to know how to do it? So obviously she has to learn how to do it. So if it was just learning to do, that for sure would apply to women, just pragmatically, even without a mitzvah. And it could be that again, why isn't it a mitzvah? because she has to do it. She knows she has to do it. You don't have to command it. What's being commanded to men is to study, even if it's not necessarily to do, or it's not something that you do right now. Maybe it'll be something you do way off in the future, or maybe it's something other people do, and study to know how to answer learned questions from other people that have questions. That is being, that's the mitzvah that is being obliged to men. But of course, the women have to learn. They have to learn everything you need to do in order to be a fully realized Jew, and that's a lot of stuff.
Rabbi, I just thinking about this now. When David, obviously his mother learned it from her mother. They were learning from very, very educated people. When I think back of what I learned from my mother, what she learned from her mother, they didn't know very much. And I find out there's a lot of things. Now, admittedly, most of this is just tradition stuff that isn't, basic halacha, but it's so different in a way.
Well, and of course that, obviously it will differ from situation to situation, but let's say, just imagine a household where, especially in a place which is more rural, which is this is how a lot of people lived, in places that were more rural. You'd have a school, but school again would there would be a certain age when people went to school, and let's say it's 6 years old. Well, by the time a person is 6, they have learned, especially the kind of stuff that is is kind of building blocks of what it means to be a person, and even how to manage a household, and to do the basic mitzvahs that are in somebody's life. By the time they're 6, they're exposed already to a lot of it, and they are expected to get a good foundation for it. Obviously, it depends on the kind of person. Same thing could happen with a father. There could be a father who has a sort of simple way in the world, and doesn't necessarily articulate a lot of detail when it comes to their child, and even later on, it's going to be apparent in the education of the child. The child's going to, as he becomes more curious, is going to start looking other places to find out information, because their parents weren't necessarily, that wasn't their way in the world to be like an articulate teacher. So they'll find it from somewhere else. But what was the basic expectation? I'm just saying, from somebody. Okay. So now tefillin. This is sort of funny that the Rambam divides tefillin into 2 separate mitzvahs. Yeah, go ahead, David.
I'm sorry, just to get back to the last thing, and maybe this is a ridiculous question. A man is obligated to teach his children.
Yeah.
Now, a man is also he's commanded to circumcise his child, but he can appoint an agent. Could a man appoint his wife as agent to teach his child?
I don't see why not. It doesn't seem like, it doesn't seem like the requirement is to pick somebody who himself is responsible in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. If somebody could teach them, it shouldn't matter who it is, right? It just says an agent. He's allowed to hire a tutor. If he doesn't know he's supposed to hire a tutor, that's what the Rambam said over there in that previous halacha. Or was it? Oh, wait. what happened. Rather, there's a mitzvah for each and every wise man to teach all students. One is obligated to hire a teacher for one's son, whilst one is not required to undertake any expense to teach a colleague's son. So if I mean, the assumption is if you can't do it, you're supposed to hire one. It doesn't say, and I don't hear a svara for why it has to be somebody who himself is chayiv in the mitzvah. That would really be a stretch, I think. I hear the question, but I don't think it's hard for me to believe there's a that is a requirement that the person, as long as the person knows, what difference does it make? You know, we do say, like, in order for me to say kiddush for somebody else, I have to have the same obligation they do. But I never heard that for teaching Torah, that's a requirement for teaching Torah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I don't know. It's an interesting question, but I just don't. It seems like a bit of a stretch for me.
And it's cheaper if your wife's doing it. You don't have to pay her much.
That's it. That's 100%. That's, I guess, the number one consideration is saving money on this. That's the Jewish way is to figure out how to save it. Okay, we are going to pause here. We are studying together tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem, but we are not on Wednesday. I'm traveling to New York, and we're not going to study on Wednesday, and then we're also not studying on Monday and Tuesday of next week. But I'll be back for Wednesday's class, Bezrat Hashem. Also, I do want to tell you guys, there's on Tuesday, December 13th, we're having the senior Sephardic rabbi of the United Kingdom. His name is Rabbi Dweck. So he is going to be visiting Chicago, and we're having him in Northbrook. We're going to have Mincha and Marav. It's on December 13th. So we're having Mincha like at about 4:10, and he's going to start speaking at 4:30. He's going to speak till 5:15. And they asked, what should he talk about? So I suggested that he just talk about his community and what it is to be, because you never hear about it. You always hear about Rabbi Sachs and Rabbi Mervis, but you never hear about Sephardic Jews. What do they do? And so I just thought it would be interesting. Plus, it's a very interesting history, the community, the Sephardic community. There's all sorts of fascinating characters. I don't know if he'll be up on all of it, but the Sassoon family is one of them. There's quite some interesting Sephardic families that ended up in London over times. And so that's December 13th.
And that's what day? That's a
Tuesday.
day.
It's a Tuesday.
Okay.
Tuesday. And it'll be 4:30 p.m. on a Tuesday.
Nice.
Shkoyach, Rabbi, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Rabbi, I just finished
Yeah.
watching the last series of The Crown, come to
And?
think of England. I don't think it was good as the first ones. I don't know if you're still watching
I
it.
haven't even watched. I didn't watch any so far because
Yeah.
I was
Okay.
concerned about that because the other ones, even the ending of the previous one, I just
It's
I don't know why. Maybe I think watching somebody tell about something that I feel like I was alive and aware of feels different than those earlier ones. But
yeah, it is.
did you experience it differently?
Yes, well,
Because of that?
especially now that she has that, this one takes place during the Diana controversy. The whole thing is about,
Yeah.
I didn't know about Mohammed Fayed. Wow. I had no idea about
The
him.
details.
Oh, yeah, that was very
don't.
interesting. That was very interesting. But now that Charles has actually become king, I mean, the whole thing is looked at in such a different light than that, but interesting. Anyway, thank you. Oh, did you get my email? By the way, the last will be first, Matthew. That was from Matthew. That
Wait,
the
Oh,
last.
the last will be first? No,
Yeah.
but when did you send me an email? Recently?
Last week sometime. You'll find it. It's okay. It doesn't.
Wait, remind me what it was.
I happened to say the sentence and the last will be first.
Okay.
Yeah. And you
Okay.
thought it might be from, the ultimate, but it's actually Matthew 26 or 16. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
anyway, yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
I'll see you tomorrow, God willing. Thank you so much.
Very good.
Bye-bye.